How many of you have worked with engineers who didn't have a lot of use for your opinions about the product's user experience? We've all been there. If you're not actually the front-end developer or the UX designer assigned to a project, people may not listen to you, even though as a writer, you are an expert with words and on the user interface. How can you turn that sometimes reluctant cooperation into true collaboration? For most of my working life, I have inhabited this strange twilight zone between user experience and technical communication. In fact, I came up with a special catchphrase for what I do, the right UX. When I was first introduced to the idea of UX writing, I thought, is this what I've been doing all my life? Well, yes and no. UX writing is a subset of the work that I've done and used to do, which also involved usability testing, user research, and product design. So let's talk a little bit about what UX writing is exactly and how you can get your people more interested in having you do that on your products. UX writing is the writing or the words that are part of how people interact with a product. It's that conversation between the product and the user. It can be the microcopy on the UI. It can be error messages. It can be labels, help, man pages, or even the comments in a configuration file. It's an important thing to remember is that CLIs, sometimes that is command line interfaces, also need UX writing. Now I'm going to tell you a little story about how I developed a relationship with the Customer Portal Labs team in China and how that relationship started as cooperation and moved to collaboration. It all started with an email from China that I opened. And no, this wasn't that kind of email. It was from some Red Hat engineers in China. The initial request was relatively simple. One of the engineers wrote asking for help. My manager agreed that I could fill in until they hired a full-time writer. The engineers wanted me to proof the apps for typos, grammar, misspellings, that kind of thing. They also wanted me to rewrite the help files, but it was a pretty tenuous, kind of low-level thing they wanted. But as our relationship grew, so did their willingness to work with me. This was my first assignment from them. The original help text is difficult to read with lots of dense text. I ran a readability test on the content, and the original readability score was a Flesch-Kincaid grade level of sophomore in high school or 10th grade. Not too bad, although the reading ease was only 45.9 out of 100, so it flunked. I've highlighted a couple of problem areas in yellow and pink. The text had phrases like, "This is an attempt to help you." Frankly, a phrase like that just doesn't belong in any kind of technical documentation. The original help text also explains how any application works when you make a selection. You will go through a server or client configuration guide according to your selection on the app's initial page. Any user with even minimal software experience knows how to do that. It also had some grammatical errors and typos. This is what it looks like now. It's actually still out there on the customer portal. And I also tried to figure out, I added headings and bullets, and I tried to figure out what the lab user needed to know before they could begin to use it. The new text is scannable and clear. The new readability scores are also much better. Grade 6.9 or elementary school. The Flesch reading ease is now 65 out of 100. After rewriting the help file, I took a look at the app. As far as the app went, I mostly ended up fixing typos and things like that. The floodgates in our relationship began to open. Instead of just fixing typos and grammar, I began suggesting that they change menus and tooltips, and they were making those changes. I helped them redesign the navigation menus for the, excuse me, for the iSCSI Helper app. The original menus were just a list of nouns, and these menu items were actually sequential steps. So I made it a lot more a series of verbs. Client or server became select client or server. Version became select version. Targets for creation became specified created targets. And once all these actions were complete, the user would click the final verb and download the file. I also rewrote this and changed it from blue text on blue type. Okay, and then finally, I got more and more requests, and we did this one where they started out with basically really difficult instructions, and then we turned it into a wizard, much simpler, much better, much more a work on the UX redesign. So with all this work that we did, cooperation became collaboration.